Hi everyone and welcome back to Operation Occupation. This week's occupation is reminiscence. For those that don't know, reminiscence is any form of storytelling about the past or past events. Reminiscence is so important as it offers us an opportunity to share our thoughts and our feelings about the experiences we've had. It also allows us to recall and reflect upon important events within our lives. The ability to recall and reflect can help older adults remember who they used to be in order to help them define their identity in the current moment. We can all relate to positive feelings we experience after sharing memories and stories that we've enjoyed. In this way, reminiscence has the power to reduce stress and agitation. This occupation can be completely individualized to the person you're supporting, so the activity analysis will change based on what you're hoping to achieve or what exactly you focus on in the reminiscence session. We know that making a plan is always really important, but it's particularly important for this activity. Reminiscence is such a broad subject and it's generally not meaningful unless it's personal. So the first step is to create a focus or a theme. Think about the person you're working with and a time frame, a relationship, or an event in the past that they would enjoy reminiscing on. This may involve a little bit of digging in terms of speaking with family or staff that know the person well, or it may be very obvious to you. Next, you need to think about how long the reminiscence session will last. And again, this will depend on the person you're working with and how long they'll be able to focus or remain engaged in the task. Some people may need a break. Some sessions might be short sessions, 5 minutes. Others can go up to a couple of hours. Again, it's very much dependent on who you're working with. Following this, you can consider what format the session will take. So reminiscence can work really well in a group format, but if you're choosing to use a group format, the topic will need to be inclusive for everyone. So for example, you might choose a decade that all the members of the group experienced, and the type of materials might be different for each person in the group. If you are running a group, you'll need to set boundaries to make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to take part. For others, it may be more suitable to have a one-to-one session to get the most out of it. Then we need to think about the environment, and this is really important. It's vital to choose a quiet space where there will be no interruptions. It's also important to think about accessibility and comfort. So can the person reach or see all of the materials, and can they be made to feel more relaxed? Then you will need to gather all your resources, and we're going to talk about resources a little bit later on. So what you will need for this activity will depend on the topic, the event or the time frame that the person chooses to focus on and the person that you're working with. A good way to think of ideas is to focus on each of the senses and provide an experience for each of them. So some examples might include, from a visual perspective, photos are a fantastic resource for reminiscing, be that actual photos, photo books, or photos uploaded onto iPads and tablets. Often family members are a great source for old photographs and childhood photos, but again, make sure that they label the backs of them as much as possible so that the supporting person can help the individual identify what's happening in the picture. Old newspapers, books and programs are also really useful from both a tactile and a visual perspective. In order to introduce sounds, you might think about playing music or news clips from the era. Theme tunes can also hold lots of memories for people. And in terms of smell, you may consider sourcing an old perfume that would be familiar to the person, or cooking a meal that may have been familiar to them in the past, which can also provide a taste experience. So reminiscence is generally an activity that we do with others. So we're not ultimately aiming for independence. However, there are some supports that may allow a person to participate more in the activity. There are apps available which may be useful when reminiscing. The Nicky Music app was created for children, but it can be used with adults to support choice around music. Music files can be uploaded with your chosen image to represent these, and then the music is played by pressing on the image. The Our Story app is also really useful in terms of gathering photographs and creating stories. Subject lines can be added to each photo or video, and voice recordings can also be added so family members can leave voice messages or familiar friends. These can be really meaningful, and the subject lines also support unfamiliar staff identifying the people in the photographs. Other aids might be useful to consider, such as switches to support the person to change photos. So images and photos are such a huge part of reminiscence, and it's important when we're looking at these that we think about the person's ability to see these and to access them. Larger photos might be easier for a person to see. Photos on thick card can be easier for people to grip, and also consider a contrasting background colour to aid visual perception if this is difficult for the person, and we know that that's often difficult for people with dementia. So we know that reminiscence is really beneficial for individuals with dementia, and there are things that we can do to support that person to continue to participate in the activity as their dementia progresses. And the majority of these things are around providing prompts for others. So labeling photos, as I mentioned earlier, documenting everything. So for instance, if the person has a newspaper article or something of value from years ago, it's important that it's recorded somewhere what that is and what it symbolises for the person so that someone can prompt them if they forget. It's also important to continue to build on that person's life story. So write down everything you know about that person so that others and unfamiliar staff have prompts that they can use in a reminiscence session. It's also really valuable to use familiar voices. So as we mentioned earlier, recording family members, having videos of friends or people that are familiar to the person is really useful. As always, it's really important to check the person's communication matrix before starting a reminiscence session. So you may think about using a visual schedule to prompt the person to move on from one task to the next within the session, or you may think about using love or other communication supports throughout the session. Next, we're going to talk about some practical ideas of how to support an individual to participate in reminiscence. So a really lovely place to start is by developing the person's life story and documenting that. So be that in a book, in a scrapbook, on an iPad, whatever is most suitable for the person. So document their life story, and based on that, you're going to create a memory box. So a box of items that symbolize different memories for the person. So as you can see here, we've got an example. On the left, you've got some key points in a person's life or things that are really important to them. And on the right, you've got examples of items that might be in their memory box. And here are some more ideas of items that you might include in a person's memory box. If you're running a reminiscence group, or if you are hosting a session each week with an individual, you might want to pick a theme to focus on. And here's some ideas of themes that you might choose. And then, as always, we come back to the different levels of support a person might require to participate in a reminiscence session. So if a person is independent with aids or setup, it's important to provide the materials and follow the person's lead in terms of what they would like to focus on. If the person requires slightly more support, you may provide some suggestions or prompting to move on to another part of the session, or you might identify a different material to look at. A person that's independent with aids or setup might also benefit from a visual schedule outlining the steps involved in the session so that there's a clear beginning, middle and end. Others may require more support to structure the session or to physically explore the materials that you present. Similarly, a person may require more support than previously mentioned to access the materials. So for a person that requires moderate assistance, the session may focus on a smaller number of materials and be shorter in length. So that would allow the person to engage in the sensory experience. So for example, music might be accompanied by one tactile experience, and the person might need some hand over hand assistance to feel those materials. So for a person with maximum assistance, you might provide hand over hand assistance a lot more throughout the session to explore the materials. Or you might pare back on the materials altogether and use the environment to provide the experience. So, for example, you could make sure the person is cozy with a cup of tea and then put on some music that might trigger memories, and maybe also project photographs onto the wall or use smells to trigger memories. We have created a full document with a list of ideas, supports, resources, and websites where you can access old newspaper articles, for example, and trace your family roots. And that document is saved on the CT Library under Operation Occupation and Reminiscence. So please do have a look at that. And as always, if you need any further support, you can contact the OT department. Thank you. Bye bye.